So, hey guys, welcome to the newest episode of the SaaS Sessions podcast. Today we have an amazing guest with us, who is Srinath Srinivasan. So, currently he's heading sales and customer success for the APAC and EMEA region for Plivo. So, why don't you go ahead, Sri, and introduce yourself and Plivo for the audience?
Great. Thanks, Sunil. Thanks for the introduction. Yes, I've been with Plivo. I look after sales and customer success for the international market. This is my third year and prior to this, I have spent more than a decade in a telecom product company, Subex. And yeah, that's pretty much what my background has been.
That's really great. So, to set up the context, right? So we're going to talk about sales today. And before that, before we could jump into that, so there was this webinar which I was attending just a day ago, which was about sales in these current times, right? So there was a quote, or there was something which Rob Jepson said. So he's a sales
Mhm.
leader, he's a sales coach, and he's a sales influencer as well. So he said this one
Right.
thing about about selling in these times. So right. So he said we are in the same storm but not in the same boat. The storm affects each boat differently. So as a sales guy, you should understand what boat your customer is in and how is the storm affecting that
Right.
that boat. And once you figure that out as a sales guy, it is very easy for you to approach towards him and then sell. So what do you think about this, Re?
Oh, absolutely. I think these are absolutely trying times. A lot of business models would change. I mean, I'm definitely seeing a lot of impact to some of my colleagues, my customers, partners. So I think it's a very fair statement. It all depends on how companies' business models have been. And specifically for a salesperson, I think this is a wonderful opportunity. I mean, going through some of this from a business point, because you get to know your customers better at this time, right?
Right.
I think I'm seeing a lot of that from many in the industry. Your customers also, I mean, you bond better with customers at these times. There are obviously certain businesses which get impacted, but they completely stick with you because we will definitely get past this. And when the storm settles and things are back as usual, customers also would have understood who are the vendors that they can invest and work with better. So this is absolutely a wonderful opportunity to understand one's potential if one is willing to do that.
Awesome, definitely. And so, Sri, so you have been into sales for about 7.5 years, right? Since that's from Subex and now at Plivo. And I know that you started at Subex as an engineer, and then you kind of got into pre-sales, and then you got into sales specifically. So you've been into sales for 7.5 years, and I've heard from a lot of colleagues of yours, who I know, that you won a lot of awards at Subex. So what were those like? And I am guessing like you won multiple awards, so which shows reputation because you're kind of doing the same thing because you've won awards at multiple years, and plus which shows growth as well, because if you have won award this year, maybe it won't, the same things that you do this year won't help you win an award next year as well. You have to like do something else or do more or basically grow and scale up. So what were those things like for you?
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Just a small correction in the background. You're right. I've spent about 8 years in sales, but I've been one of those very few people who has directly moved to sales without being in pre-sales. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I was implementation engineer earlier on in Subex. My responsibility was to go and deploy the products with our customers then. And I moved to a sales role when I was a solutions architect, right?
Yeah.
So I skipped the step perhaps of going from mostly people directly move into sales or spend some time in pre-sales. I think I was one of those who took the risk and directly jumped into sales. So in terms of awards, I would call it more of recognition rather than
Yeah.
awards, because everyone is well awarded. Every company awards their performing employees, but there was a lot of recognition in all the companies that I have worked with. Specifically, it was around what most of it being measurable, right? So I think that is the reason for success, because when I started off in sales, and or when I said I have an interest to work in sales, the first thing which I did was set expectations in terms of what to measure, right? And then post that, you automatically get into the grind and you start trying to be more aggressive. You start trying to get more business, and once things start working, then all the blocks fall in, right? So yes, it has to be repetitive in the sense, your attitude, your ability to execute, the challenges that come, how you tackle some of those, and each industry is different. And luckily for me, I had a very good team which helped me get to my numbers. So yes, there was good recognition, which it's kind of some of my ex colleagues who did mention something nice about me, but I think that's the part about repetition and growth.
That's really interesting. And I remember when we talked before, so you mentioned this thing which is so everyone is a sales guy. So I think that mentality kind of help you stay consistent in getting while getting these recognitions and through all these years. So why do you think that like everyone is a sales guy?
Yeah, I keep saying that to most people I talk to, because they always look at sales as a very, what do we say? It's a very glitzy, it's a very kind of glamorous, difficult kind of a work, right? But actually, it is not. I mean, everyone is a sales guy because everyone is selling something to the other, right?
Right.
So if you look at sales as such, it's pretty much about convincing somebody else about your idea or your approach, right? In the business sense, we understand what sales is, but otherwise, that's what it is. So a HR person is trying to convince another candidate about joining a company, right? The engineer is trying to convince a manager about a design or whatever they do, right? So everyone is trying to sell some thoughts and approaches. The only difference is professionally as salespeople, we are measured on numbers, right? We are expected to deliver on our growth, right? But yes, I believe that everyone is a salesperson. Everyone is trying to sell something. Um, in most cases, it is an idea or an approach.
Totally. I get that. And let's take a step back in when you were in the techno-functional role, right? Before you got
Right.
into pre-sales when you were at Subex, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
transitioned from a techno-functional role into a pure sales role. It was a tech SaaS company, right? So how do you? I remember you telling me you started with like account, and then you were assigned a territory, then you were assigned a region, then you were assigned a bigger area, and then you're probably heading global sales for one whole market, right? So how did you grow into these roles? Like what were the things that really helped you?
So the transition from techno-functional to the sales role that happened at Subex, right? So like most people, I was a technical person. I mean, when I say most people, as a graduate, I was predominantly in a tech role. And once I started getting more into the field side, that's where my interest was. So the primary reason I got into this was because of my interest, and I thought I could make a difference. And the way I went about it was I reached out to my then manager and requested him if I can work on one specific account to show that I'm capable of it. And that's how it all started. So I was given one account in the APAC region, which I grew, and then the company was willing to give me a little bit more accounts and territories, right? So over a period of 4 years, from when I started as a single account manager, I was able to grow to a regional. I was given a regional responsibility, and then when the company spun off and had additional products being launched, I took the responsibility of the global sales for that product.
Nice. That's a really interesting journey. So when you said like you were in this techno-functional role, so you had a lot of tech understanding, right? You said that you are not a hardcore engineer, but you were in a techno-functional role, right? And then
Right.
you also said that sales is basically convincing. Like everyone is selling something at their in their different points of like, even though if you're not a sales guy, you're trying to sell something, right? It's basically
Right.
just convincing people of what you think about some stuff, right? So if we
Right.
combine these two things, right, someone who has like a person who has a great techno-functional understanding of things, and plus a person have a great convincing power, so can this guy become a great sales guy? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it, right? I mean, I have known wonderful salespeople who have no knowledge of technology, right? So when I say techno-functional, it is someone who understands technology but perhaps can't code, right, or can't develop, right?
Yeah.
But it is. I mean, as I said, there are very smart people I have worked with, whom I know, are wonderful sales guys, and they do not know technology at all. But
Uh-huh.
I've also seen, a few other salespeople who have a good understanding of their platform, their technology. So they're able to have a lot more meaningful conversations, right?
Right.
So specifically in the SaaS space, most of the conversations have to be done remote, and the opportunities that you get to discuss or have meetings with someone are, it's definitely difficult, right? So you want to be as convincing as possible and give as much information where necessary. So I definitely think that if someone has those skill sets of being both techno-functional, understanding their product more so, and definitely being a good convincing, having good convincing power, they can do a better role there, right? But predominantly, to be a great salesperson, in my view, one aspect is convincing, but there are other aspects as well. Things around the ability of someone to identify opportunities, right? Whether it's with an account or whether it is you're going after new businesses, right? Very important to understand the current product, platform, service, whatever it is that one is trying to sell, right?
Right.
With a reasonable technical knowledge will be an additional value, I feel. And more importantly, to be quite persistent in terms of getting that across to the customers or to your leads, so that they know that they have the right information to take decisions when needed.
Totally. I think that truly makes sense for a lot of tech SaaS companies out there, because let's say if you consider
Right.
companies like Plivo or MoEngage, or even in the sense like Whatfix, so like the sales guys should definitely understand like how the tech works. And so I've seen in bigger companies like Akamai and Salesforce would generally pair up two people. So one is basically a sales
Right.
guy who has great convincing power, and then there's another guy who's a sales engineer guy who has a techno-functional understanding of things. And just so they two would
Right.
pair up and close more deals. But if there is, as you said, right, if there's one guy who has great techno-functional understanding and great convincing power, he can definitely be a great sales guy. So in this sense, should tech people know sales, or should sales people understand tech? What would that be according to you?
Yeah. I mean, I just want to go back a little bit to your earlier question, if that's okay, right? I think it makes sense to have. I mean, there's a reason why certain companies have people with different skill sets, right? A sales guy can't replace a technical person, or
Right.
the other way around, right? It also depends on how technical a product should be, and the reason why you have different people with these skill sets is because they go very deep into their domain or their skill sets, right? So I'm not saying, or I'm not at any point mentioning that both the roles can be combined into one. All I feel is that if a salesperson understands technology better, they are more armed to have those conversations with
Right.
different kinds of people, right? But it does not mean that one does not require a solutions engineer or a sales engineer, as may be the case, right? So just
Totally.
making sure. I mean, that's my thought on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Now,
it would reduce a lot of dependency if a sales guy would know techno-functional understanding. So it would reduce a lot of dependency on the very basic things on the sales engineer side, right? Because if the sales guy could understand these things, he could not go to like the sales engineer guy every now and then, right? He would be able to answer most of the questions of his customer all on his own, like at least the basic ones.
sure. No, but understand the most important thing about you can teach. I mean, it's not too difficult to pick up technology, right? If you
Right.
have an interest in it. But
Right.
picking up sales, it is a flair, it is an interest, right? So you
Mhm.
can't teach someone the art of negotiation or the art of to figure out at what point,
Right.
you should pursue a negotiation, at what point you need to stop, right?
Right.
That is something very difficult to teach. So personally, I think it's easier to help someone pick up those technical skill sets if there is an interest in that individual. But it's not
Right.
difficult to teach someone sales. You can only coach someone if there is an interest, but you
Right.
cannot teach them how to sell, in my view,
Right.
right?
But I think you
So
you
if
got
you're
it the hard way. But I think you got it the hard way because you had a great techno-functional understanding and still you got into sales. I mean, you just said that it's the hard way of getting into sales, but you just did it. So I think that's people can look up to you for it.
no, I think it's only a question of interest, right? I mean, there are a lot of smart people who do that.
Yeah.
It's
Hmm.
it's just an interest in, and the opportunity too, right?
Right.
The ability to convert that, right?
Totally.
To your earlier question on good techno-functional understanding
Uh-huh.
and good, I mean, I think your question was, will that interrelate? Would you mind repeating that question?
So it is like, someone with good techno-functional understanding and someone with good convincing power can create a great salesperson.
Oh yeah, why not? I mean, sure. The only thing which you need in sales is the ability to close deals, right? Get numbers, do not leave a lot of money on the table in terms of get as much value, right? So It is good for the company and it is good for the business as well. So that's what is sales eventually, right?
Right.
Being knowledgeable, being aware of the product is a must, because unless you do that, you may not even be selling the right solution. I mean, we do hear stories of customers buying one tool or product and then figuring out after it's deployed that this is not what they wanted, right?
Right.
So knowing the solution, knowing the product obviously helps.
Right.
But yes, eventually for a sales guy, it's all about they being able to convince someone about the product, their idea, approach, as may be the case.
Totally. And I think that would make sense, because when you're into sales as well, so your customer is a different guy in the company and your consumer is a different guy. So when you're specifically, let's say if you're into I think any SaaS or a tech SaaS, for example. So the guy who's
Mm,
the person who's going to make the buying decision is someone who would not necessarily be the same person who's using your product as well. So again, the
correct.
customer is different and the consumer is different. And I think your customer would talk more sales to you and your consumer would talk more tech to you. So I think that's why,
Right.
in terms of pairing as well, as you said before, right, many companies would pair up two people. So I think it would be that, because the sales guy would talk to another your customer, and your techno functional guy could talk to your consumer, right? So what do you think?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think depending on the kind of organization
Totally,
that
yeah.
we operate in. So, for example, if it's an enterprise, yes, I mean, it's very structured. Sales cycles are longer. There are different
Right.
teams which provide requirements, and a different team which does the commercials and closure, right? However, startups and mid-sized companies, it is decisions are quicker. People like
Great.
the CTO or the CMO, depending on what the product or the platform is that they want to use, they take those calls, right? The advantage is for most of the SaaS companies, while you have internal functions in terms of sales guys trying to focus on enterprises or sales guys trying to focus on a different kind of market, while we do that, I think at some point these lines get blurred where you just have to sell to the lead or the customer that's at the other end of the call, right? So it always helps to be aware of that information. But in most cases, yes, unless since the breadth of people you work with are so different, you need to be able to have a meaningful conversation to a reasonable level with most of these people.
Awesome, totally. So, from your experience, how can you encourage people to take the same path? Because I think there are a lot of people in India and in great cities like Bangalore and Chennai and Hyderabad, who are great techno-functional people, but who are not so great at sales. Like, is what I've seen. Like, India produces more engineers than salespeople. A lot of people would have good convincing power from these people as well. So, how could they follow the same path and get, if they are interested, obviously, into sales, where could they start?
Right. Rightly put. I think the last part where you said if they are interested, number one, it
Right.
has to be their personal interest,
Right.
right? If
Totally. Totally.
they see a value in terms of why do they want to be a salesperson, they should be able to answer that first, right?
Right. Right.
So that is the most important thing. That's number one. But if they decide if one has an interest to do that, the first thing is start small, because that way you are also able to fail quickly or succeed quickly. That way you can measure stuff. And it's always good to start that in your existing organization, right?
Right.
Never try to switch companies and then try to get into a sales role, because when a company is looking for a hire, they want to hire a salesperson, right?
Right.
So they are looking for someone with experience. So the best place to start is start in the current organization where one is working for, and it's good to start with something small, right? So that's number
Right.
one. And number two is have a good mentor, right? Whether it could be a sales leader within the company or somebody else outside, you need to have the person to coach you on some of these softer aspects, right? How to negotiate, when to push pedal to the metal, when do you need to be aggressive, when not, right? Attend a lot of these meetings whenever your seniors are attending, observe, right? And good mentoring is also needed, right? Thirdly, I would say one should have clear measurable goals, right? In terms of saying, is this working for me or not? While they might be an interest, while the organization gives one an opportunity to try something, uh, if you're not meeting the goals, it's not helping you, nor it's helping the company, right? In
Yeah.
which case you need to know if is this the direction you would want to pursue, right?
Right.
It doesn't mean that when someone fails they stop, because that's not what it is. But at least you know that this is the reason why it's not working out. Maybe it's a market you have working, or it's the product is not working, or maybe it's an individual thing as well, right? And lastly, I think which is very important is be risk averse. I mean, don't be risk averse, be a risk taker, right? take certain amount of risk in terms of what you want to achieve, because nothing is going to come on a platter. Nobody is going to say, all right, move into sales, because people have, they expect someone to come with that skill set, right? And once you're given that opportunity, then nobody is giving you a long rope, right? You need to quickly find ways, show progress. And the only way you can do some of that is start taking a certain amount of risk in terms of how you achieve and execute, right? So those would be my few tips in terms of what one could consider, but most important being the personal interest.
Totally. That's great. I mean, so yeah, we have reached our course for this episode, Sri, and I have a few lightning questions or rapid fire questions. So maybe you can start answer whatever is on top of your head. So one thing I want to
Yeah.
start with, like, so you mentioned one point while talking about your experience and how could someone get into this. So you said talked about having a great mentor. So who was the mentor for you?
Okay, so he was my ex-colleague. He was handling the sales earlier in that region. So when I approached him, he was willing to give me an opportunity to start with one account, right?
So like
So
any name?
yeah.
That,
Oh yeah, his there were actually two people. One person was Subhajit Chakravarti, and the other person was Shankar Radha.
Great. Okay. And then so in terms of your work and in terms of your career, so what keeps you going? What's like the motivation for you?
Yeah, so it's always been what next for me in terms of, as I said, you want to have measurable goals, right? So once you reach something, it's always been what's the next bigger challenge, right? So one aspect is either you work with a company which is growing, so automatically challenges keep coming, right? Which is what we have at Plivo. Growth is good, so obviously with that you get a whole bunch of challenges, right? So that pushes you to find solutions in a very short time. In my case, solutions means mostly commercial solutions, right? So so that is one. Or the other thing is, how can you be more productive with less, right? I mean, even prior to this pandemic and some of these situations that we are having, I think as a company we have been very careful in terms of how to execute more with less, right? So that keeps me personally going in terms of how do we achieve some of these with whatever constraints and factors we have.
Awesome, awesome. And my last question would be if the current you could call the 25-year-old you, so what would you say to him?
Oh,
Mhm.
I would say continue doing what you're doing, because you will end up fine, right? And that I'm pretty sure would work for most of them. I wouldn't want to change anything of what has happened so far, right? So I would just say be a little more relaxed, learn to have a little more fun
Oh,
along the way,
mhm.
because everything will work out fine. But I wouldn't change anything different or advise anything different to my 25-year-old self.
Oh, great. I think you had it all sorted out back then.
Right.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's
so
great.
maybe I would have had a little more fun, taken a little more easy along the way.
Mhm.
That is the only thing which I would have told myself then.
Great. So thanks a lot, Sri, for joining in. And I just wanted to end on one more question about, so is Plivo hiring right now?
Yes, we are looking for positions globally.
Great, great. So I might just include this as well in my description so that people can reach out to you or to Plivo.
Sure,
Great, great,
absolutely.
great. So thanks a lot, Sri, for doing this. Thanks a lot for taking time and talking to us today on this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Sunil. It was wonderful. Stay safe and let's keep in touch.